Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Acupuncture is My Life. Now, in this episode, I'd like to continue my discussion on diet and the importance of Eastern nutrition consultation, okay? Which is extremely important, along with acupuncture, because it's not just about the insertion of needles, and many individuals see acupuncture as just that, and there's much more to it. And this is why I'm always recommending that you download the Acupuncture is My Life app, because with using that app, you get to understand so much about acupuncture, acupressure, cupping therapy, moxibustion therapy, tuina, Tai Chi, Eastern nutrition, and much more. But along with acupuncture, diet is important. And this is why in many cases, you may hear an acupuncturist recommend that you eat certain types of foods to rectify certain disorders. And that's why in the last episode, I got into the types of foods you eat, the groups of foods to be eaten to achieve a certain balance, and the difference between raw and cooked foods and quality of ingredients and vegetarian or meat diets and so forth and so on. But in this episode, I want to jump into thermal nature as well as flavors, because this is super important, because the properties of foods tend to elicit certain effects upon the body that many individuals don't realize. So you may be faced with a certain disorder, develop a certain excess pattern or deficiency pattern, and not understand that it's simply the foods that you're eating that's causing that. So many individuals will go out and, let's say, sit with a nutritionist, and they may say, vegetable juice smoothies are great for you, and eat a bunch of carrots and celeries and stay away from red meat. And no, that's not good. Because does your constitution warrant that? You see, with an acupuncturist, we understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Although I don't drink milk, and I don't recommend anyone drink milk unless you're drinking your mother's milk for a short period of time after birth, milk elicits a different effect or a different response from each and every one of us. So understand that. You ever notice some people can smoke a cigarette, and I do not recommend that, and live 100 years smoking cigarettes? And some will smoke cigarettes and die of lung cancer at 40. That's like that common sense example to say everyone's different. And acupuncturists understand that. And it's the same when it comes to food. What type of effect is a certain type of food having on your body as opposed to someone else? Do you understand that when you're told to eat something, or you hear on television or whatever that something is good for you? It may not be good for you. It may be good for person X, but not person Y. And acupuncturists, we understand that. Let's take, for instance, an individual may overdo it with eating foods that are warm on their body. But now, warm and hot-natured foods are good, depending on a certain disorder. Why? Because warm and hot-natured foods encourage a person's chi to go up. Now, many of you don't understand acupuncture, and I recommend you sit with one. But I'll give you an example. Stomach chi. Stomach chi is not supposed to go up. If it does, you're vomiting. Okay? You're belching a lot. Stomach chi is supposed to go down, where you're eliminating feces, you're moving your bowels, or you're passing gas. So if you find yourself vomiting and belching a lot, that can be an indicator of stomach chi going in the wrong direction. And an acupuncturist may recommend that you eat foods that are warm or hot nature to encourage chi to go up. Now, you could be suffering from poor circulation of chi and blood. Warm and hot natured foods promote circulation of chi and blood. It also stimulates yang. So if you're yang deficient, your acupuncturist may recommend that you eat foods that are more warming in nature. It also increases metabolism. So if you have a slow metabolism, okay? So keep in mind that warm foods relative to thermal nature are great for individuals who are suffering from deficiency patterns or cold conditions. But eating too much of it, just as I always say, too much of anything is no good. It'll aggravate a heat condition and it'll create excess patterns. So you want to be careful. And an acupuncturist will educate you to all this. This is why I say, along with seeing a physician on an annual basis, make regular wellness visits with an acupuncturist. It's for your own benefit. Now, what about foods that tend to cool the body? That's important to an acupuncturist as well. And this is where we get into raw foods. And I've had individuals contact me, message me on the Acupuncture is My Life app with regard to yesterday's discussion about raw foods. And they live by a raw food diet and what's wrong with raw foods. I never said there's anything wrong with it. Everything in moderation, number one. But raw foods can create, too much of it will create problems. You see cold or cooling foods tend to cool the body down. And that's great for individuals that suffer from internal heat. And also, now we're going to get back to stomach chi. Because, again, if you find yourself vomiting or burping a lot, it could be a sign of stomach chi going in the wrong direction. So you may want to, an acupuncturist may recommend that you eat more foods that are cooling in nature, because cooling foods tend to direct chi inward and downward. As well as a hyperactive person is just on 1000. It slows down the metabolic process as well. Raw foods are the coolest of them all, but you really, really want to be careful when it comes to it. You don't want to overdo it. You see, foods that are cool in nature tend to positively affect the spleen in moderation. And they tend to be easier to digest. But an acupuncturist would recommend cooling foods, again, like from someone who is suffering from some type of heat pattern. Spontaneous sweating, night sweats, but keep in mind too much in the way of foods that are cooling can weaken yang and create stagnation. This is why it's important to sit with an acupuncturist. Undergo an Eastern nutrition consultation session. But outside of thermal nature, flavors of foods are important too. Let's say like sweet foods. Sweet foods tend to have an affinity for the spleen. And sweet foods are yang in nature. And an acupuncturist understands that. So if a patient is suffering from some form of yang deficiency pattern, they'll make recommendations that you include certain types of sweet flavored foods in your diet. Because sweet flavored foods tend to be stimulating and beneficial to the digestive process, as well as it relaxes muscle spasms or spasms of the smooth muscles. Let's say, for instance, now let's talk thermal nature and flavor. So in this case, sweet and warm flavors, an acupuncturist understands it tends to strengthen. It tends to tonify chi and yang, as well as it builds yin and blood. Whereas sweet, cool flavored foods tend to be moistening and cleansing internally. But you don't want to overdo it with sweet foods, because it can cause accumulation of both phlegm and dampness, and it can also aggravate tissue proliferation, which usually occurs in obese individuals and people that have growths of tumors and plaques and stuff like that. Okay? But now, keep in mind, there are a lot of root vegetables. And the key word is root. Root vegetables, grains, and meats that are sweet and warm, or tend to be sweet and neutral. Whereas, like, let's say fruits tend to be sweet and cooling. But keep in the back of your head, sweet foods tend to be emphasized more so in patients who are suffering from deficiency patterns. And sweet foods have an affinity for the spleen. Whereas sour foods have an affinity for the liver. See, because sour foods are yin in nature, where it's contracting and astringent. And it usually tends to be cooling. So you see, sour flavors benefit the liver. Now I'm talking quality foods here. I'm not talking about candy and junk. Keep that in mind for the record. Okay? But sour foods tend to benefit the liver. It tends to tonify and tighten tissues. It stops fluid leakages, such as in sweating. So a person suffering from spontaneous sweating, or they tend to urinate a lot, and acupuncturists may recommend that they include more sour foods in their diet. But be careful, again, too much of anything is no good, and excessive sour flavored foods in your diet can retard a person's metabolism and inhibit their ability to expunge pathogens. So if you have, like, let's say a viral infection or bacterial infection, you want to be careful with the amount of sour foods in which you eat. You want to eat it sparingly, especially when there's internal dampness or some type of pathogen that's lingering. Because too much in the way of sour flavored foods, quality foods, can cause dryness, and it can injure a person's sinews. So keep that in mind. Everything in moderation. And there are many fruits that are sour, like leek, lemon, tomatoes, vinegar, yogurt. I don't recommend yogurt. I'm like, personal opinion, anti-dairy. Pickles, wine. And this is what I'm saying when I have episodes saying leave the wine alone. And so many women over the Acupunctures in My Life app will blast me. They'll like put me on blast. Like, what the F is wrong with you? And I can't stop, and whatever. But you see, sour flavor is drying. And here's where it correlates with dehydration. So be careful. But keep in mind, sweet foods have an affinity for the spleen, sour foods for the liver. But if we notice that as an acupuncturist, if we notice that you're craving too much in the way of sweet foods, we know that there's something wrong with the liver. Spleen. There may be a possible deficiency pattern with the spleen. The same with sour foods. What's wrong with the liver? Why is this person constantly craving sour flavored foods? And we have to look into that. Now, salty foods has an affinity for the kidneys, and its nature, it's yin in nature. It tends to be cooling and moistening, and it focuses its effects inwardly and downwardly. Okay? So its direction is down. So again, if chi of any meridian related to the internal organ is going in the wrong direction, it's going up where it should be going down, salty foods are great for that. And salty foods are great for like patients who present with certain nodules in the body. And acupuncturists may recommend that they eat more salty flavored foods in their diet. But keep in mind, again, too much of anything is no good, because then it can aggravate a person suffering from internal dampness. It can damage, too much salt can damage the bones and blood. as well as it can disrupt fluid metabolism. And we're talking about like kelp or seaweed, seafoods, fermented soy products, parsley, millet, and of course salt in and of itself. So you want to be careful. You see, as a licensed board certified doctor of acupuncture, I understand that health is wealth. I know that the wealth is not in an app on your phone or in a mutual fund account. It's not in the bank, nor is it in a safe. I understand that it's not in your pocket, it's not in your purse. It's not under the mattress, nor is it in a shoebox in a closet, and it's not under the doghouse in the backyard. The wealth is in you. All acupuncturists understand that. But keep in mind, salty foods have an affinity for the kidneys. And when a person comes in craving excess salt, this is how the body communicates with nature, uses nature to repair. Salty foods benefit the kidneys, but too much of anything is always bad. Let's take acrid foods, for instance, that are yang in nature. And acrid foods tend to disperse and direct qi upwards and outwards to the surface. So let's say you have a cold. Remember grandma would give you different types of things that you were like, yuck. But it was acrid in nature. So in order to disperse the cold, send it to the surface, sweat it out. See, acupuncturists understand this. We understood this for thousands of years. And acrid foods tend to be beneficial to the lungs and sometimes even the spleen in assisting with the digestive process of rich foods or tonifying foods. Acrid flavored foods tend to promote sweating. It breaks up phlegm and invigorates the circulation of qi in blood. And it also can disperse stagnant qi in blood as well. So it's important to know that as well. See, this is why I say sit with an acupuncturist for regular wellness visits. It's all about your health. But you want to be careful. You don't want to eat too much in the way of acrid foods because it can dissipate qi and yin, and it can cause internal dryness, especially in the lungs and stomach. So be careful. And if you have a deficient constitution or you're suffering from a deficient pattern at the moment, you don't want to eat too much in the way of acrid foods. And acrid foods can be warm, it can be cool, because we're back to thermal nature now. See, acrid warm foods are usually like onions, chili, ginger, pepper, cinnamon, among others. Acrid cooling foods can be like cabbage or radish or celery or peppermint or watercress. But try not to cook acrid foods too much because it takes away from its quality, its effectiveness. But again, acrid foods have an affinity for the lungs. Sweet foods, the spleen. Sour foods, the liver. Salty, kidneys. Acrid, lungs. And these are all yin organs. But I know some of you are asking, what about the heart? Yeah, the heart, bitter foods. Because bitter foods are yin in nature, and it's drying, and it tends to descend. And it's often, more times than not, they're usually cooling in nature with regard to thermal temperature. See, bitter flavored foods tend to dry dampness. And in small amounts, again, it positively impacts the spleen, and it encourages stomach qi to go down, remember? Because stomach qi is supposed to go down, not up. See, overall, bitter foods help to sustain a person's qi dynamic, which is super important. Like, for instance, when you include thermal nature, bitter and cool foods are good for clearing out internal heat, especially internal damp heat. while bitter warm foods tend to dry up dampness. So if someone has damp insides, where there's heaviness sensation and joint pain and things like that, bitter warm foods would be good for that. But eating too much in the way of bitter foods can damage the spleen. It can damage yin and blood and cause dryness. And this is why I say stay away from coffee, because coffee is considered bitter flavored food. And there you go with the dryness again. So you really, really, really want to be careful. And this is why I say see an acupuncturist for regular wellness visits, because it's all about your health. It's all about your health. That's what it's all about. Okay, so make acupuncture a part of your life. And many of you have already done so. Because acupuncture is my life. What's yours?